General Kellogg, do you hear me?
I hear you. Can you hear me, Alexei? I know that.
Yes.
I see the picture. I'm up. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we hear you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much for joining us in this early time in the United States. General, we have a great hall full of guests who are very interested and eager to listen to you today. We're very thankful for you that you found time to speak with us today. And on behalf of Ukrainian people, I just want to thank you for all support that you gave to Ukraine and continue to give to Ukraine during these very hard times. Thank you very much, sir.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And I wish I was with you. I had another international requirement that I had to honor as well, but I plan to see you. I plan to be in Kyiv at the end of the summer as well. So I'll get back into Ukraine and see what's happening there as well. But again, thank you very much for the support and what you are doing right now.
Thank you. Welcome back, sir, anytime. And so let us start with next. I think there is no sense to explain why Ukraine desperately needs United States of America. But I want to ask you, what do you think? United States of America, do you need Ukraine? And if yes, why?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I look at Ukraine strategically, what it means, I think the answer is yes. I think just not the United States. I think the entire West, I think the entire world needs Ukraine, not only for the resolve, which was clear, but your ability to push back against tyranny or against aggression as well. And I think that's really good for what they've done. And here in the United States, we are, frankly, consumed right now with the Middle East and what's happening there. But I think I think that's good in the sense that it's kind of taken Ukraine off the front burner. And I think that's important because it's let everything kind of cool down. And I've said before that strategically, it's good for Ukraine to do as well as it's doing right now, because I've said repeatedly, I've said it to the president, I've said it to everybody, Russia's not winning this war. They've got their attitude about winning is a lot different than my attitude about winning. And I think that Putin has got a major problem right now, and what he's trying to basically figure his way out of it right now. But I think Ukraine has done that. And it's a bright light for the rest of the world.
Thank you. And you already mentioned Middle East. Well, how do you see the situation? I mean, we hear from you in Ukraine, looking at what's happening in Middle East, we have mixed feelings. From one point of view, here in Odessa was the first Shahed attack in autumn 2022, when Russia used Iranian-made Shaheds and maybe Iranian prepared launches, because we know that Iranian instructors were in Russia helping them to start this technology and using these drones. And the first attack was here in Odessa in October 2022. So we see when you are destroying this Ayatollah's regime from one side, definitely we like to see this. From another point of view, there is a feeling that U.S. administration now is completely absorbed with the Middle East issue, and not so much time and capacity is left for Ukraine. How do you see this? This situation in Middle East, it helps us or not, in general, where it's moving?
Yeah, well, I've already been very vocal about this, that I really get worried about a theocratic regime, one that's led by religious zealots, who are basically a bunch of thugs who've killed a lot of their people. Now, the reason I've said that about Ukraine is because, it's everything kind of, put the onus on Putin to do something, but especially the Europeans who stepped up. Like, look what Sweden just did with the Griffin fighters and coming to Ukraine as well. And I think that's good, because it allows us to pivot to the Middle East and allows Europe to pick up. And I think I've said it repeatedly, that I think Europe doesn't believe this sometimes, but I said they're a lot stronger than they thought themselves. They are. And I think by that, I think they shouldn't worry about the Russians. I think the Russian threat to Europe right now is a little bit overblown, primarily because of Ukraine, and that the Russians are not as capable or dangerous as we were back in the Cold War. I remember when I was in Europe, stationed in Germany for 5 years, we worried about the Soviet Union at the time coming across what we call to fill the gap. Well, the Soviet Union is not Russia. You know, and I use this as an example. I said, you know, the Russians have lost between 1.2 and 1.4 million dead and wounded. You know, they left Afghanistan after losing 18,000. And so what's happening right now is it's sort of Putin's problem to figure out, how do I get into this mess I got into? And of course, he's trying to put a lot of pressure on Donetsk Oblast. And I think you can't give up that land to do it, because giving up that land, you give up the fortified cities and you give up defensible terrain as well. And I've told the President of the United States, like, if you're really concerned about them giving up the land, make Russia fight for it, because the Ukrainians will do very, very well. And, you know, I think statistically, from what I've heard, they've only picked up about 1% of land ever since the original invasion. So they really haven't done very well. And that's the reason I said earlier, their definition of winning is different than my definition of winning. I think the onus is on them to basically, not necessarily, I would like them to see them pull out, but at the very, very worst case, it's a status quo of the lines of contact right now, and go to peace from that position, not with de jure, but de facto. In other words, they occupy the land, but we don't recognize that. There was a doctrine in the United States years ago, and it's still current, called the Wells Doctrine, that we do not legally acknowledge that anybody has captured that land. We say they're de facto. They actually sit on it. They own it. But we're not saying by law we recognize it. We just don't do. That's what they're saying. We're saying the same thing about all of the oblasts that the Russians have basically occupied. You can occupy them, but we're not going to give them any legal justification for being there.
Yeah, we counted with this current level of Russian gains, they will need 10 years, more than 10 years, just to occupy Donetsk Oblast, the rest part which is still under control of Ukraine. Just for this, it will take 10 years and maybe 1 or 2 million people lost in action. And you already mentioned the numbers which Russia lost during this war and compared it to, for example, Afghanistan. So my question to you is probably, first of all, as a military, can we count Russia still a great power? We're here in this forum this year speaking about what is great power, what defines it. Can we call Russia great power?
No, I don't. I think they're a regional power, obviously. As long as a nation has nuclear weapons, they've got to be considered, you know, a great power, only because there's only 9 nations that have nuclear weapons. That's, by the way, one of the reasons why that President Trump, when he went into Iran, was the fact that we could not allow them to develop nuclear weapons. It would have totally destabilized the Middle East. If they had to enrich uranium to weapons grade, they would have gotten a weapon from somebody. They would have either bought it or had the technology from North Korea to develop one. And then their missile fleet, which at the time was the largest in the Middle East, and they had missiles that could reach France. So I always ask the question, why do you need to enrich uranium to weapons-grade uranium, and why do you need that missile fleet? It doesn't make any sense that they would do that. So when you ask about Russia being a great power, I think they're a regional power with nuclear weapons, but they're not, when you say about a global power, when it comes, I believe, when it comes to the China-Russia relationship, they are the junior partner to Russia. I mean, you've got to ask yourself the question is, if Russia was so good, why are they but why did they have to bring North Korean soldiers in to fight up near Kursk? That shows you they've got some real problems in defending their own homeland, that they've got to bring another party in for the fight. So it's a great question. It's one that I'm sure strategists will think about. But to answer your question, no, not really. I think they're regional, not global.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this answer. And I want to ask you about how you think American administration now watches at Ukraine. Because you know that there were ups and downs. You did a fantastic job, but at the same time, we'll remember some difficulties, I would call it like this. And recently, during last month, we heard several very inspiring things. Secretary Rubio, for example, called Ukrainian army one of the strongest in the world. Vice President G.D. Vance said about the scale of assistance that United States are #1 supporter of Ukraine during all these years. So can we say that now, maybe after Middle East, maybe understanding that Ukrainian experience is important and so on, that there is a change in attitude to Ukraine now, and if yes, in what direction, and in general, how you see current administration looks at Ukraine today?
Yeah. Well, when you look at Ukraine, we've always said that Ukraine was primarily a European issue. The reason for that is there was frustration when we go back to the first Trump administration, when a lot of the European allies, NATO allies, didn't fulfill what we call the Wales Declaration. And in 2014, they all went to Wales, all the leaders of those nations, and they said they would spend 2.5% of their GDP on defense, of which 20% of that was modernization. Yet when we came in, the administration came in for the first time in 2017, in January of that year, only 3 nations of NATO were meeting that number. So there's some frustration that we had with the NATO partners basically saying, well, we're going to build up our social platform and not build up our military platform. I think that's a mistake. When you look at what Ukraine is doing at the size of their army, if they get to an 800,000-man army, it'll be the strongest army in Europe by just numbers alone. But in their technology and their ability to fight, they'll be at the top of the list. Now, I think that what we're seeing, what I am seeing, is the arc of security now doesn't basically sit in Germany or in France or in the UK. If you look, it moves actually further to the east. And now that arc goes from Finland and Sweden, it swings around to Ukraine down to Romania as well. And I think that's very important for the future. So the arc of security for Europe as well actually has moved to the east. It's moved out to the old countries like Germany and France and the UK, only because their capability is not what Ukraine's will be into the future. Ukraine will be basically the Sparta of Europe into the future. And I think that's a compliment, that as good as they are and as well led as they are, that I think the Ukraine's going to be a very powerful player in Europe. I think when it comes to the next few years, everybody will look to Ukraine as actually the leader. And I think that's important into the future, because you just look at statistically and what's out there and the forces that are there. And the forces are battle-hardened, they're battle-trained, great leadership, and numbers alone, they're going to be at the forefront. And I think the United States sees that. They said, well, the real leader in Europe will probably end up being the Ukrainians, even though the old powers that we go back and remember from 16 and 1700s, the British or the Germans or the French, they will actually cede that leadership to the Ukrainian leadership in the future. I would say that's a real compliment to you. It's a real compliment to a developing nation like Ukraine really is, based on years alone, not going back to ancient history. But I think when they go into the future, I think that's something to basically, as we say in America, hang your hat on it and build on as well.
Thank you, sir. And important question. And this question is it's super important for millions of Ukrainians, because you are in President Trump's team. You were advising him on Ukraine. You were special envoy, and you continue to be in his team. The question is, how you feel, what is the personal feeling of President Trump towards Ukraine? President Trump famously said that he would make peace, in Ukraine. And believe me, many Ukrainians, millions of Ukrainians, are really looking forward, and our hopes are on President Trump to have peace in our country. So how you see how President Trump feels about Ukraine, and is there any dynamics during this little bit more than a year of his presidency? Second.
Yeah, it's basically, the reason we say that Ukraine is basically a European issue is because the focus is Europe, and they need to step up to the plate, as we said earlier, to do that. Now, I think, and I kind of do this tongue-in-cheek when I say that part of the issue, I think, is presidential leadership. When you look at President Zelensky and President Trump, they're both a lot alike. They both came out of the entertainment business. They're both basically, they can be both stubborn. They can both be very opinionated. And I think sometimes there's a clash. And It's like any human dynamic, you'll get a clash like that. It's not that it's bad for anybody, but just you have to accept that. And once you accept that and you look at the future, when you look at the administration, and Senator Blumenthal said earlier, the fact is, when you look at the numbers, the people in America support Ukraine and what they're trying to do. And I've said it repeatedly, just even a few years ago. When the United States pushes back on Russia as a strategic adversary, then that's not necessarily bad. That just kind of puts everything in perspective. And aggression is bad, and they were the aggressors into Ukraine, and we understand that, we recognize that. And I think what we're trying to do is rebalance everything. We have global interests. Global interests meaning we worry about South America, we worry about Latin America, we worry about Cuba, we worry about Venezuela, we worry about Europe as well, we worry about the Far East. And what's happened is that it doesn't deplete your arsenal that you have, but it means we have to put prioritization where we're going to be at any certain time. And right now, the prioritization is the Middle East, because that's our biggest concern, because we do not want Iran to be a nuclear power, because it totally destabilizes the Middle East, be it Saudi Arabia or be it the Emirates. And so that's our focus right now. As I said earlier, that is a good thing for Ukraine, because I think what happens, it allows everything to basically have a cooling off period on relations, and basically Ukraine is handling the Russian threat fairly well, and the NATO allies, or the European allies, are now starting to step up. Just like I saw the other day, I mentioned earlier about Sweden and the Griffin fighters, which is a good multi-role fighter. It's a Generation 4 fighter. The only nations that really have the Generation 5 are ourselves, the Russians, and the Chinese. But again, it goes back to what the Russians have. I said it repeatedly. When we went into Iran, we beat everything the Russians had, meaning they gave their Iranians all their best equipment, their air defense systems or any of the other systems, and we're able to punch right through them. So I'd say to anybody, you better not buy Russian stuff. You better not buy Chinese stuff, because their stuff doesn't work as well as our stuff does. And I think your defense industry, if I may, is building up as well, and you are now the leaders, and we don't have any doubt about that at all, are leading into the future of warfare, which is basically drone warfare. You've led that, and we're trying to basically capitalize on that by pulling in your businesses, and at the same time trying to learn from you as well. So I think everything, in my opinion, and I know it's hard. I know it was a hard winter. I get that. But I think where you're at today is a lot better than where you're at a year ago or 2 years ago. I think it's for the first time since 2023, Ukrainians are gaining land. And I think now you put the Russians on the back foot a little bit by the deep attacks the Ukrainians have had. And I think that's good.
That's really happening thanks to armed forces of Ukraine and thanks to our allies. And we hope that we will continue like this. We already started to speak with you about peace process and negotiations. You were directly involved, and it's important for us to understand where we are, because the feeling is that the negotiations are stopped. Where are we now in this peace process? How you see this?
Remember now, the two lead negotiators for the Middle East are the same lead negotiators for Ukraine and Russia. And you really can't be two places at the same time. But you've got Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They're trying to work with the Arab allies right now to come to some type of peace agreement. So that's the reason I said they're taking the pressure off the peace agreement or peace discussions with the Russians at this time. I think that's good. I think it, as I said, allows a period of cooling off. Look, and I know one of the hard things, and I've said before, is over time, I think what's going to be really important, because we have done it as the United States, is eventually you're going to have elections again. And I know those are because of martial law. You haven't had the elections. But I think over time, that's something to think about. Going into the future, what is that going to mean? And what you do is you establish resiliency, you establish of your institutions, but at the same time you establish currency of the current leadership. The longer it goes, the worse it becomes, because then there will people say, well, now aren't you moving into a new dictatorship by a length of time? The answer to me is no. But I think over time you're going to have to say, okay, when do we get rid of martial law? And when do we start having another election? I understand the process. The process will take time to do it. But at least you need to be, the RADA, which you're part of, has to develop that and start thinking about that as well for President Zelensky. Will he probably run again? Of course he will. But at the same time, I think anytime you can have an election and puts democratic principles ahead of somebody like the Russians and President Putin, I think that's a real plus for Ukraine. It's a real plus for anybody who happens to win an election, but it's something to think about well into the future.
Speaking about elections, definitely here in Ukraine, we are clear, and as a person who's been here many times, and your family, and thanks for doing this, that today the elections are just impossible on security reasons. Even if to take historical examples, in the United Kingdom there were no elections between 1935 and 1945, even despite the fact that there were no German army on British soil, British ground, and unfortunately we have Russian army on our soil, and unfortunately every day we are attacked throughout the whole territory. So on security reasons, it is impossible today, but definitely it will come after the peace will come. So we have now a lot of talking in Ukraine recently, like President Zelensky, he said that maybe there is a chance for peace till November, this November. At the same time, we heard some articles saying maybe in 2-3 years. And then Angela Merkel, former German chancellor, said maybe we will see peace in this decade. So it's a very different prognosis. How do you think? I understand you are not Nostradamus, but according to what you know and what you see, when Ukraine can receive peace, when this war can be over?
Well, look, I've said before, you could do it today if you wanted to. Not you, but I'm saying that the peace process can go as long as the Russians say, well, we'll decide right now, we'll be status quo, right at the lines of contact, and come to a ceasefire right now, and then everybody later either goes home or whatever it's going to take, but at least you talk about it and see where you're at. And I think that would be good. But I think now, with the summertime, and when you get into the fall, I think the Ukrainians are on the front foot, not the back foot. And I think that's important. And what I've noticed about President Putin is you put him under pressure, and then he's got to start thinking hard about what he's doing and what is basically, you're looking at what his military is doing at the time or what the oligarchs are doing at the time. Now, let me go back. I understand what you said about the British, but we held elections, we the United States, during wartime, but we didn't have anybody on our soil. That's true. And the British didn't have anybody on their soil, which is true. We just looked at it, we set it up constitutionally. I was stunned as we went back to our Constitution, be it Franklin Roosevelt or Truman or whoever was involved in that. We all understood the requirement for it. The reason for that, I say that, is because psychologically, the fact is when you look at the rest of the world, you say, look, we were willing as a free nation to basically buckle up, and I know what your Constitution says, that we can actually have these elections well in the future. And I understand that you can't because the pressure's currently under right now. But it's going to be one of those you should plan for into the future, because what you want to do is when it comes out, when you do get a peace settlement, I think then your next step is going to be, well, how does the vote go? How do we do this? And it's difficult because currently you've got one fully occupied, for sure, oblast, which is Crimea, and then you've got to the north, Luhansk, and you got most of Donetsk. Now, the question is, how do they vote? Because by your Constitution, it's going to be a vote of all of the oblasts and the referendum as well. So I understand there's difficulties. I don't minimize those at all, but I'm just telling you strategically what I would say. This is a thought to do so. I would say the same thing to President Zelensky, and I would say this is going to accrue the advantage of Ukraine being the new leader of Europe and a powerful leader at that. So those are all items of discussion that are, I think, very important for going forward in democracy and what it looks like with your role in Europe into the future.
I want to ask you about Russian blackmailing. The whole world looks at Russian nuclear saber rattling and blackmailing Ukraine and the world with their nukes. Again, some new exercises, this time in Belarus. There are already nuclear weapons in Belarus. And time and time again, they are doing this. I am very interested, you worked in administration. Did Russia give us signals to the United States, and how about possible use of nuclear weapons? And what is American, US estimation of possibility of realizing of these threats which Putin uses all the time?
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be nuts to think like that. The fact is, that was never brought up, the use of nuclear weapons. There's always a concern about it. I mean, when you talk about it, you always talk about what, and I hate the term, but it's used a lot, of tactical nuclear weapons. And I think that's one of the reasons. I go back to what happened in the Middle East about Iran. But I think he talks like that, but it's bluster. You know, he says, well, we're going to use tactical nuclear weapons. I think to do that would make him clearly a pariah among all nations. I mean, look, the only nation that's used atomic now, we call nuclear weapons, is the United States. And we haven't even thought about using those unless it's a strategic exchange. So I think what he says like that is one of those, yeah, okay, well, right, it's not going to happen. But it scares people because it's such a devastating weapon. But right now, I do not see anybody seriously thinking that they're going to use nuclear weapons on the ground there in Ukraine. But when you've got somebody like a Putin, you know, you don't know, because I think that this is a guy who's basically concerned about his own survival. He now realizes the war is not going well for him. And these are the kind of people, when you back them into a corner, they lash out. So it's always going to be a concern, just because they've got the weapons. We know they've got tactical nuclear weapons. Is he stupid enough to use them? I don't think he is, but that threat is always there. Any nation that's got nuclear weapons, you're very, very concerned about it. I mean, look, I'll give you a historical example. Years ago, when I was in the Pentagon, we were very concerned about Pakistan and India both having nuclear weapons and both going at it. And we reminded both countries, do you realize what that'll do if you both use nuclear weapons? And we actually had to pull them back from the brink. So that was the last time I saw that actually happening. I think there's always going to be a fear, and they're going to be talking about it. But I think that I think even he realized, I think the Chinese realized, that's basically, as to use an American term, that's a bridge too far. He's not going to do that.
Oh, thank you. That is very important message, and thank you for this. We are here now in Odessa, in the capital of the Black Sea, the biggest city on the Black Sea shore, not just in Ukraine, just biggest, period. And we are speaking also about Black Sea region, the whole region, not just about Ukraine. So it looks like for a long time, Black Sea was watched as a kind of peripheral lake near Mediterranean. And I think now the situation has completely changed. How you see the future of Black Sea, the current situation in the Black Sea region, security, and the future of the Black Sea, its importance, and how it is estimated from the United States.
I always think the Black Sea is going to be important, primarily because for Ukraine, we're getting, sea shipments out, your grain shipments out through the Dardanelles, which are controlled by Turkey as well. But it's always going to be a very, very important part of the world, not just for Ukraine, but when you look at Romania, who's got there, or the Russians have got ports there as well. Ukraine does as well. But I think, frankly, for Russia being a Black Sea power, you quite well shot that one down. And especially when starting with the sinking of the Moskva years ago. So I think it's an important piece of the world. It's important for your cargo going out. I think going through the Dardanelles, getting the shipping lanes clear. It's always going to be an important part. Odessa is a beautiful city. I've been there. It's lovely going to the seashore as well. So I think the Black Sea Security Forum is important because it says to the rest of the world and the region as well that the Black Sea is important. I mean, I would ask you, not only ask Ukraine that question, but ask Romania that question as well. Because when you look at them, they need the Black Sea as well for their seaports and getting items in and out of the Dardanelles. So it's very important. It's an important place. It's an important dialogue that you're having right now. And by the way, I extend my regards to Ambassador Volker, who I think there's, and Aliona, if you're out there as well, to both of you. So I just think it's an important forum. I wish I was there to be with you. As I said earlier, I had previous engagements I couldn't break as well, but I'll be back with you before long.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One more question to you as a professional military at the same time, geopolitical mastermind and national security mastermind, world-class level. Your advice to Ukraine, after the war will end, Ukraine will have million-strong, battle-hardened army. How you see the future of Ukrainian army? What is your advice? What Ukraine should do with this force from one point of view, but understanding all responsibilities and burden which it also has? How you see, and what is your advices to Ukraine? How we need to deal with this huge, probably the most important asset that Ukraine has today?
Yeah, look, I said it before when I said that the arc of strategic dominance is going to run through Ukraine one in the future. And the backbone of that dominance will be your army, which will be the largest in Europe, the most battle-hardened in Europe, and will take the lead from them as well. So what I would caution is I wouldn't fall into the trap that the Germans or the French or even the British fell into, which once a conflict is over, you diminish your armed forces by cutting back in size. I think if you're on the front lines, you've got to have a very robust military. And I think you've got it right now, and I think you need to continue that. So my advice to the Rada is that make sure that you don't start cutting back on your military forces. Keep them as strong as they are. Keep the 800,000-man army that they're talking about, and my term is, you become the Sparta of Europe.
Let us move a little bit north from the Black Sea and Belarus. Today we see, first of all, we hear some news speaking about, again, that can be a possible threat and invasion of Ukraine from Belarus. It is discussed, again, in the media. At the same time, we see quite intensive contacts between American administration and Belarusian, we should say, dictator Lukashenko. Do you really think, is there a real threat for Ukraine today from the north? Can be a new invasion like it happened in February 2022 happen again now?
Yeah, I think President Lukashenko, if he would decide to do something like that, would be absolutely stupid. It'd be nuts to do that, because I think his force would be defeated. He's already got internal dissent there. And I was one of the people who went to see Lukashenko when we were trying to get political prisoners out at the time, which we got him out at the time. But the buildup, and of course he's very close to Putin. His buildup is, they're not really, I think their threat is to their west as well, meaning the potential conflict. And I think I would not be that concerned about it. You hear about talking about it, but I think when it comes to talking to him, if he gets pressure to do that, I think it would probably be the end of Lukashenko as we know him, because I think his forces cannot combat against Ukrainian forces as well. And on the northern route, I know that's one of the original routes into Kyiv, but I don't see that into the future. I think you'd be exceptionally foolish to do something like that.
Thank you. And we are speaking today also about technologies and new warfare. Drones became a revolution. Here in Odessa, naval drones were invented, and from Odessa they started and attacked Russian Black Sea Fleet and destroyed 1/3 of Russian Black Sea Fleet, which was absolutely something nobody would wait for, but it happened. So, as a military person, how you see this continuation of this drone revolution which happens right now? What will be the next steps on the battlefield?
Well, I think the drone technology is advanced. I mean, when you think about warfare in the future, drones are going to play a key role. Excuse me. And they're and we're seeing that in the West as well. You know, it's sort of like when the machine gun came on and the airplane came on or tanks came on. You see an evolution, a revolution in warfare, of technology. And I think the Ukrainians will lead that. I think everybody's trying to capitalize on that as well. And I think Ukrainians are leading that. We've got teams in there right now that are looking at drone technology. This is technology that's going to grow just not from the battlefield. You know, when you think about it, it's in the future of evacuation of the wounded or supplies, whatever it's going to take. Drones you minimize manpower to do it. So I just think that they keep developing that. And the industries of Ukraine are very important to do that. You know, some of your great industries like Firepoint and the rest of them are just showing everybody else the way. And I think the Russians realize that, Iranians realize it, Chinese realize it, North Koreans realize it. I know you realize it as well. And I was very impressed by how that development has started and has continued as well, and hope to be a part of that well now and into the future as well.
Thank you very much, sir. I want to ask you to make some address to Ukrainians. You know, millions of Ukrainians know you, millions of Ukrainians respect you, and it's very important for us to hear your advice, to hear your address, what we should be prepared for, what we should do now, how you see what will happen in the next months. So please give some address to those Ukrainians who are listening to us now.
Yeah, I would say, you know, stay firm on what you're doing. I think I know the winter was really hard. It was a harsh winter. I understand that. And I think now that you're in a better position to do it, and I think just keep fighting on. It's what you're doing. And don't basically fall for any bad negotiations or a bad peace deal. The fact is, I know you want to get there. I know it's going to happen. Probably, you know, I wouldn't pick a date, but the future, both sides are tired right now, understandably, and both sides have been supportive, but the Ukrainian people are incredibly resilient. Look, I remember the last time I was in Kyiv was when there was, you know, we were listening and I was watching news articles about a previous attack of drones. And the fact is that people, when they went to the subway, were actually singing the national anthem. You can't capture that anywhere else. That's important. It shows the resilience of the people. It shows their dedication to Ukraine, their loyalty to the nation as well. And just say, you know, there's an American term, it's hang in there. And I think that's what you want to keep doing now and into the future. And it's a shining beacon to the world, and people respect that. And I know I do. So I would say just understand that eventually wars end, it'll be over, and then the rebuilding starts well into the future. So, you know, just understand that the difficulties you have today will be gone by tomorrow.
Thank you very much. A last thing which I want to tell you and to ask you to address and to send this message to President Trump. So here we are in an opera house of Odessa, which was built during Russian Empire times. And there is a special place reserved here for Russian Emperor. And Vladimir Putin was absolutely desperate to sit at this place. That was his dream. The dream which will never come true, thanks to Ukrainian armed forces and thanks to support of our allies and people like you. And this place, we reserve it now for US President Donald Trump as a peacemaker who will bring peace to Ukraine. I just want to ask you to send this message to President Trump saying that we in Ukraine, we put our hopes on him because we need peace as soon as possible. We need American support and shoulder in this. And we want to invite him to sit here as a president of free nation in free Ukraine, in a place which was Russian emperor so desperate about, but we don't want to see them anymore, and they never will be there. but American president, we want to see him there. Please send this message to him. Thank you very much, sir.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please give a round of applause to General Keith Kellogg. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Thanks again.
Alexei Goncharenko, Keith Kellogg, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the forum, the Black Sea has always been a region where the future of nations are decided not in a single move, but in a long sequence of strategic decisions. A region where every country knows the price of choosing its own path. So our next conversation brings together two voices that each in their own country have stood at the center of exactly that choice. Please welcome to the stage the moderator of this conversation, Kira Rudik, member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, leader of the